precisely what the Europeans were doing in Germany when they were getting rid of the Zollverein and these other, barriers within Germany. Germany and France, and finally all of these countries in Europe are trying to become, on the eve of World War I, one great big market. Abraham Lincoln had the vision for what this continent would become. So there's the economic motive, the political motive. It's also been suggested, and I thought you were also going in this direction, that Lincoln's depression, so many people, he didn't have, what are these depression medications, Zoloft and things like that? He didn't have Zoloft. What did people do in those days? Okay, they would drink, a lot of them. Abraham Lincoln was a teetotaler, so you take off alcohol from the agenda to deal with your depression. He sublimated it. He found a way to take that energy and say, I am going to do so. I have a terrible marriage, with a lot of strife. I've had many frustrations in my life. I'm losing children, my sons. I lost my mom, all this kind of stuff. He, rather than give up and die, spiritually, morally, career-wise, he finds a cause for this country. And that's why he pursues it with such vigor. His life depends on it, in a sense. In the same way that Theodore Roosevelt tells us that his life depends on pursuing the vigorous life in the White House. Because Theodore Roosevelt was also prone to depression. After his wife and his mom died on the same day in 1884 on Valentine's Day in the same house, of different diseases, one from the childbirth and the other from a different disease. Little Alice is born. Theodore Roosevelt goes to the Dakotas to become a cowboy. He says later, if I did not go to the Dakotas to become a cowboy, I would have died. I would have died. And Roosevelt uses the metaphor of the horse. He says, black care pursues me. I have to ride that horse with my crook. Gets the horse. Stay. Just gallop ahead of the depression that would overtake me. These people, in the age before Zoloft, find a way to deal with their personal depression and this crisis and become energized in adopting this great cause and sublimating it. This is how Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Winston Churchill had what he called his black dog. A lot of these great men, these powerful testosterone-loaded men, great leaders, had terrible battles with depression. It's part of the human condition. It's like it was the mind's way of forcing them to try to get off that high energy level every once in a while and hibernate just a little bit.
Well, I just want to, Ted Kennedy spoke about the same sailing after his brother died, depression suffered, and then getting on the water at night, either directions which were just the pluses for energy. So it's another example.
Yes. This is, the more people write about this, the more fascinating it is. And look, I was very, I think, rigorously trained as an historian not to go too far out on a limb. You cannot psychoanalyze somebody who's dead. You got to be really careful. I'm a very conservative historian in that sense. However, as psychologists go back and look at the biographies, and new documents are discovered, and more testimony comes to light about the lives of these people, I do welcome the observations of people who say, well, it suggests that this person is fighting depression here, or has some kind of anxiety disorder. I mean, we are obligated to try to find answers to what drives certain people to do the things they do when you look, as I've tried to say in this talk, of the obstacles that are overcome. And the obstacle that you have to overcome is getting past me to get back home. I don't want to go on too long.
Well, you you mentioned all these 5 obstacles that you face, and yet the panoramic view that he had. Can you just imagine what might have been happening if he hadn't had all these bad baggage? My gosh, it would have been a mind on.
Well, or on the other hand, maybe because of the suffering. Brian and I, we've developed a leadership academy at the Hallenstein Center, and one of the things that I try to point out to groups of people, talk to a lot of different groups of people who are interested in leadership. And I think I surprise them a little bit when I tell every group that great leaders had to have been broken at some point in their lives. They have to be broken to reassemble themselves. They have to have been tested and gotten through the test. If they're not broken by depression, grief, career failure, some awful personal failure maybe, if they're not broken, they don't know how strong they are to come back. They often will lack compassion for others who are going through similar problems. Leaders have to be really smart in dealing with other people. Leaders have to show at a personal level a lot of compassion for others who are going to have failures. Now, they can look like hard asses and they can tough as nails, but let me tell you something. The leaders I've been around, close range, as close as you and I are, ma'am, you get into a room with them and it's just the two of you talking, these leaders drop that very strong facade and you can talk to them as human beings and they understand something about the human condition. And it's because somewhere in their lives they were broken. And they are better for it, for having come back. Now understanding how fragile we are. The human condition in some ways is very fragile. And yet to find that strength out of that fragility. I emphasize this to students, to teenagers who think they're invincible and they've not suffered yet. You know, they have the helicopter parents and they're just soaring. You know, they're doing great. And I say, I don't expect you to believe me now. Just keep these words in mind. Something is going to break you in the next 10, 20 years. Pay attention to it. It doesn't mean the end of you. It means you put yourself back together stronger, and you'll be a better leader for it. Lisa.